Hey everybody, our group is, we did our project entitled Increasing Steps Taken. My name is Nicole Bonilla and I am from Hammond, Indiana.
My name is Allison Bryant from Houston, Texas.
I'm Michael Finn from Dallas, Texas.
My name's Erica Jessamine. I'm from Scarborough, Maine.
I'm Jessica Larson from Shawano, Wisconsin.
And I'm Carissa Schultz from Chicago, Illinois.
The original study that we chose was increasing physical activity in young adults with autism spectrum disorder. The dependent variable was increasing physical activity using stepping for individuals diagnosed with autism. And the independent variable was goal setting, reinforcement, and feedback. And how it worked in the study was that the 5 young adults diagnosed with autism did increase their steps. And when we replicated it, 5 out of the 6 participants did increase their steps as well, using goal setting, reinforcement, and feedback. Next slide. I chose 5 articles for the supporting documents, and in Article 1, in the study called Quantifying Moderate to Vigorous Physical Activity in High School Physical Education, a pedometer steps/minute standards, the independent variable was feedback through pedometer usage and the amount of time versus the defined schedule. The dependent variable was increasing physical activity using stepping for young adolescents, and how the results related to the Lambda ETL 2014 article, the original article. They both use pedometers with a set amount of time to achieve the physical activity, the goal activity. And the individuals learned how much physical activity was needed, more or less. That increased the step count in the physical activity. And then how, when we replicated the study, we discovered that the more time we had to do physical activity, the more steps we achieved. And then in Article 2, the study was called The Impact of Student-Led Pedometer Intervention Incorporating Cognitive Behavioral Strategies on Step Count and Self-Efficiency. The independent variable was feedback through student-led cognitive behavioral skills training versus a goal setting and logging steps group. The dependent variable is increasing physical activity using stepping for people who are overweight. And how the results related to the Lambda ETL 2014 article was that when there was a teacher or a mentor teaching strategies, this taught individuals how to be more self-sufficient, which increased physical activity and step count. And then when we replicated it, we didn't have cognitive behavioral skills training, but we did log our steps and we did have goals. And at times reinforcement wasn't motivating enough. So it might have been helpful if we did have a mentor to teach us around the barriers. And the third article, it was called Pedometers and Brief E-Counseling, Increasing Physical Activity for Overweight Adults. The independent variable was self-monitoring and a pedometer with an e-counseling component. And the dependent variable was increasing physical activity using stepping for overweight adults. And then compared to the results from the study conducted by the Lambda ETL 2014, having e-counseling and having someone to keep individuals accountable during intervention led to feedback, and it increased physical activity. And then when we replicated the study, we didn't receive e-counseling, but we frequently talked to our reliability partners, and we kept each other accountable, which maintained physical activity and increased step count as well. And then study number 4 was called Does Pedometer Goal Setting Improve Physical Activity Among Native Elders? And the independent variable was feedback using mentors providing training. And the dependent variable was increasing physical activity using stepping, American Indians, and Alaskan Natives. And how the results related to the Lambda ETL 2014 article was the results of the article was understanding barriers within certain populations, such as adolescents diagnosed with autism, and elders and people from different cultural backgrounds, and learning the strategies around those barriers improved physical activity. And then when we replicated the study, we didn't have mentors, but it might have been helpful if we had mentors because we had a lot of limitations. And it would have been helpful with like health issues and work schedules and transitions. So if we had someone to teach us around those barriers and strategies around those barriers, we might have increased our physical steps as well. And then the last article I reviewed was called Academic Incentives for Students Can Increase Participation and Effectiveness of a Physical Activity Program. And the independent variable was extrinsic reinforcement. And the dependent variable is increasing physical activity using stepping for young adolescents. And compared to the Lalonde ETL 2014 article, researchers used prizes that were really motivating for both articles and realized that increased physical activity. And then when we replicated the study, we used really motivating prizes in the beginning during the intervention stage. And then towards the end, we didn't use as many motivating prizes. We used most of them up from the beginning. And the more motivating and more valued the prizes were, the more physical activity and more steps that we got. So that was the supporting literature.
The methods. First, the purpose of the following research was to replicate a study to increase our step count during a 6-hour period to meet the daily recommended count of 10,000 steps. The dependent variable was stepping, defined as complete lifting of and replacing of one's foot on a surface while in a standing position. Examples included walking, running, jumping, climbing stairs, regardless of being stationary. Non-examples were swinging or flexing of one's feet from a seated position. Our independent variable was goal setting, visual reminders, and reinforcement. We completed a multiple baseline with a withdrawal design. Our baseline began on October 8th. Data for all of our phases of the study were completed Monday through Friday from 12 to 6. Baseline condition ended when there was no visible increasing or decreasing trends and when our graph was stable for 3 consecutive days. We then moved into treatment, which we started with goal setting every morning. So the day 1 step count for our goal was 10% more than our average of baseline. After meeting that goal for 2 consecutive days, we at least had to take 10% more for our step count for our goal as the day before that, as the previous day. And this continued until participants reached the goal of 10,000 steps. And we then returned back to baseline for 3 consecutive days and moved back to treatment. Our participants were Michael, 34, lives in Dallas, Texas, and at the start of the study worked full-time. Erica, 29, lives in Scarborough, Maine, and was employed full-time throughout the study. Nicole, 31, lives in Hammond, Indiana, and was unemployed throughout the study. Krissa, 30, lives in Chicago, Illinois, and was employed full-time during the study. Allison, 26, lives in Houston, Texas, and was employed full-time throughout the study. And Jessica Larson, 41, lives in Shawano, Wisconsin, and was working full-time throughout the study. Due to everybody's different daily schedules, the settings were different for each of us during the day. So some of us completed this during when we were at home, at work, at school. Sometimes we were at the gym, the park, walking down the sidewalk, streets, or others. The materials that we used were a red Pinko vest pedometer. We used data collection sheets to enter steps, small prizes for our reinforcement used during baseline and intervention for putting on and removing the pedometer, individual prizes for reinforcement only during the intervention stage, personal cell phones for daily alarms, stickers, and a 5-day sticker chart with 2 different cells for each day.
We made 2 different checklists, one during baseline and one for our treatment phase to ensure that we were all following the same treatment fidelity, ensure that we were upholding that, making sure that we were all doing everything the same way. in the next slide, you'll see during baseline, we had 9 different steps, which included setting a reminder timer, resetting our pedometers to 0, donning the pedometer at exactly 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. We added a sticker to our chart, our daily chart for wearing the pedometer. And then at 6 p.m., we removed the pedometer, notated steps taken. We added an additional sticker for removing the pedometer. And then provided that we had 2 stickers on our chart for that day, we gained access to a small reinforcer. And then the final step during baseline was to visually analyze that data and see if we were ready to move on to the treatment phase based on the stability of our line. The treatment checklist, you can see right here, also on a spreadsheet. It was very similar to baseline with a couple exceptions. Because we didn't need to visually analyze the data, that was not listed on our checklist. But we did have 3 additions, including recording our goal for the day, recording if the goal was met at 6 p.m., and then notating whether or not we had gained access to the reinforcer. Now, each of our participants went ahead and filled out these checklists as we went, and then at the end, one participant, myself, calculated and tabulated all the treatment fidelity results for the entire group, and you can see that right here on this chart. Overall, I think that our group did a pretty good job with treatment fidelity. You might notice that there's a differing number in the total amount of steps completed. That is because our study was a multiple baseline design. So each participant had their own schedule of when they entered or exited phases and how long they spent in each of the phases. So we do have a difference in the total amount of checklist steps that we had. That's the only reason you'll see the difference. But if you notice, Michael, she had a treatment fidelity percentage rate of 96.88%. Allison had 98.39%. Erica had 81.03%. Jessica had 90%. And both Chris and Nicole had 98.33% treatment fidelity. One thing that we did notice was that Erica had fallen below that 90% treatment fidelity required average. And that is a limitation that will be discussed later on in the presentation by Carissa.
Total count IOA was recorded every 3rd day by sending a picture to a reliability partner. Total count IOA was calculated with an Excel spreadsheet in Google Docs as a percentage of the smaller number over the larger number as an Excel if formula. Mean count IOA was calculated using an Excel formula as a percentage of the sum of the total count IOAs over the total number of IOAs. Exact count IOA was calculated as a percentage of the number of 100% total count IOAs over all entries of IOA. Group mean IOA updated in real time by pulling mean IOA for each participant into a separate spreadsheet and calculating it as a percentage of the smaller number over the larger number. This all updated in real time and posted into each participant's personal data sheet to allow participants to monitor the group mean IOA as the study progressed. You'll see this on the next slide. All IOA was 100% throughout the study.
So on to our results. All participants in the present study completed the study just like those in the original study. Out of all participants, only 1 reached the goal of 10,000 steps during treatment 1. That participant is also the only one to make it to baseline 2. No participants made it to treatment 2 phase. However, all participants were able to meet their daily goals several times while in treatment 1 phase. And although it does not seem like the treatment worked for most participants, 5 out of 6 participants did have an increase in their steps. They just didn't meet the 10,000 step goal. We can look at table 6 and see a difference in the average and range of steps for all participants from baseline to treatment 1. Michael, myself, Allison, Erica, Jessica, and Carissa's average steps increased once in the treatment phase, and Nicole's average number of steps decreased once in the treatment phase. For the 1 participant who made it to baseline 2 phase, however, did experience reduction of steps once the goal setting and reinforcement phase was removed. This is also something that occurred in the original study. And on the next slide, on table 7, this shows the graphs and it displays our number of steps that all the participants took every day. And table 8 shows a more detailed table of everyone's steps and their average and range. And then on the next slide, this is just a blown up, zoomed in picture of our graphs, and they're split so you can see them a little bit better. And so now we will all discuss our own individual graphs.
I'm Michael, and this is mine. When I started the study, I was employed full-time, so it was a little bit harder to get all of my steps in. Near the end of the study, I was unemployed, and I ended up taking my dog for more walks, and I think that's why my steps increased. I had bigger dips in my data on days when it rained or on days when I had arthritis flare-ups. And I think that's why there's such a difference in my data. Allison is next.
Okay, so here's my graph and then my table with my average and range for baseline 1 and treatment 1. While in baseline 1, I averaged 1,625 steps, and during treatment 1, I averaged 2,360 steps. The day I reached my highest step count was due to being able to go work out and run. That day I got a total of 5,924 steps. For the days I was unable to reach my goal was due to having meetings or being stuck at my desk at work. And now Jessica will tell you about her graph.
So I'm Jessica, this is my graph. During my baseline, my average was 666 steps, and during my treatment, my average was 951 steps. There was between baseline and treatment, there was a slight increase, but nothing that's too visible on the graph. I believe this was due to the times that we had our treatment from 12 to 6. I work during them times, so I'm either, sometimes I can be in meetings, sometimes I can be driving in my car as I drive like 14 hours a week for work. So there's limited time to increase my step count during them times. And now we'll move on to Erica's.
I was able to get to baseline 2. One of the reasons why I was able to get to baseline 2 is because I worked out in the afternoons after work. And I had a very low day on baseline 2 as well, which was 288. And that was because I actually hurt my hamstring and I had to get a trigger point injection. I had to rest my leg. And then I worked during the hours of 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. So at times that was really hard for me to get steps, but at times it wasn't. It depended on if I was sitting in meetings or not. If I was running around, chasing around kids or giving them motor breaks, then my baseline steps increased. And here is Krista.
All right, so here's my graph for Carissa. As you can see, the average for me in baseline was 3,044 steps, and that increased to 4,274 in intervention. I did not make it into baseline 2, and I think the reasoning for that was because I had a very variable schedule. It's never quite the same each day. So on Mondays and Wednesdays, I would have the ability to go to the gym in between sessions. And then on those days, I typically would meet my steps. And on Thursdays and Fridays, and sometimes Mondays, I wasn't able to get to the gym because I had a full day of sessions back to back. Sometimes I was able to meet my goal because I would increase my activity with my clients, but I wasn't able to consistently meet that 10,000 step goal. Here is Nicole.
So you'll notice on mine, I am the only one in our group who did not demonstrate a functional relationship between baseline and treatment. You can see I kind of have an overall downward trend line. I do attribute this mostly to the fact that as the study progressed, I progressed in my pregnancy. I'm about 8.5 months pregnant now, and my mobility significantly decreased as we went on. And at the same time, the need to drive more often and sit in waiting rooms for more doctor appointments and hospital visits, that increased, which also led to me having lesser steps than I did in the beginning. I think also in baseline 1, I had a lot more steps. I was really excited about the project. I didn't want to let the group down, hold myself accountable to everybody else. And so I think that just general motivation helped more in the beginning. And then by the end in the treatment phase, there was nothing that I could do to get enough steps. I do have one outlier you'll see in my treatment phase. It's kind of way up there, where I reached 4,100 steps. That was actually trick or treat. It was Halloween, so I was out with my kid that day. But for the most part during treatment, my steps kind of stayed pretty low. And I do attribute that to the pregnancy. So next, Cursa, speaking of that pregnancy, is going to talk about some of our limitations that we experienced throughout our presentation.
All right, thanks, Nicole. So as previously been mentioned, there were quite a few limitations in our study compared to the original study. First and foremost, we all lived in different cities, working full-time jobs, and often commuting to work by car. So all of those components made it challenging for us to get in all of our steps from noon to 6. Additionally, 4 out of 6 participants, as we've mentioned, suffered some sort of health issue during the study, which also impeded our ability to get steps. Looking more specifically, there were differences in how participants executed our protocol procedures. We realized that not everyone was graphing our baseline data in the beginning of baseline when we said we would. So that was a limitation. Additionally, there were some inconsistencies in determining our step goals for intervention, and data collection as a whole was not completed uniformly or even on the day that data was collected. Everyone was determining their treatment fidelity differently. For instance, some people only marked they were able to give themselves a sticker at 6 p.m. if they gave themselves the sticker at 6, whereas other participants thought, as long as I get it in before midnight, I'll still indicate that I did it, and so I'll mark that on my treatment fidelity. So that impacted our treatment fidelities. Additionally, not everyone photographed a 0 on their pedometers and shared that with their reliability partner. And in the beginning, we even had people entering their reliability number for themselves on their spreadsheet, which is another limitation. We had differing definitions for stability for visual analysis as well. And while we problem solved and came to a group consensus on what that definition should be, it still presents a limitation in our study. As Nicole mentioned, our treatment fidelity did fall below 90% for Erica, and unfortunately, we didn't recognize this during the study, and so we did not implement the treatment implementation retraining. Had we been paying attention and implemented that training during the study, it could have affected our results differently. One outlying limitation that existed was one participant noticed their pedometer fell off partway through one day of the study, and they were unable to correct that error. More broadly, looking at like a broad analysis, the prizes for this study were not reinforcing for any of the participants, so that was a major limitation. Additionally, the study duration was very short. Future researchers who are looking to replicate this study should consider having the duration be much longer, and they should make sure the prizes are meaningful to their participants.
So in conclusion, not all participants were able to meet the goal of 10,000 steps during the treatment phase like the participants of the original study. Unlike the original study, the participants in our study were unable to walk around as much as needed due to our work schedules and other obligations. The prizes we had all chosen showed not to be as reinforcing, and they should have been, as they should have been, in 6 hours a day deemed to not be enough time for all participants to reach their daily step goal every day. Although only one participant reached the 10,000 step goal, the study did prove to be effective in increasing steps taken. But due to many limitations, we cannot be completely sure of how effective the study would be on adults reaching a total of 10,000 steps in 6 hours. But based on previous studies, goal setting and reinforcement has been effective in increasing steps of children. And this concludes our presentation.
And we'd like to thank you for being here and open it up to you if you have any questions for us.
All right, great job, guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, I wrote down, scribbled a bunch of notes, so bear with me as I try to read them. And I guess, Nicole, you had a pretty good excuse for not hitting your treatment goals, so good luck with the delivery. You're very close.
Yes, thank you.
Speaking of babies, if you hear one screaming in the background, that would be mine. And luckily I had my microphone muted because it sounded like they were like, I don't know, dancing or something upstairs. I have no idea what's going on. Okay, so I have a couple questions, and I'm sorry if you guys hit it and I missed it. But how were your daily goals set for each participant? Did you guys just select them on your own, or like, I don't remember how that compared to the original study.
Jess, do you want to take this?
About this one? Yep, I can talk about this one. So the first, after after baseline, our first day one goal was 10% more of our average of baseline. So
okay.
Got
so
that?
Yeah, so how many days would you have to hit that before you would have changed to the next goal? 2 days?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. And then I think you guys also acknowledged this in the limitations, because most of you guys didn't go into the next baseline phase. Did you have a hard time deciding what, like, if your data were stable enough to go back? Is that why you guys many of you just stayed in that treatment phase?
We had to reach 10,000 steps to go back into the baseline, according to the study that we replicated. So
and was the goal in the study 10,000 steps too?
Yes.
Wow. So these students, did they have a 6-hour window to hit 10,000 steps?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Children must be a lot more active than adults. That's amazing. Okay, so that's interesting. Okay, so there's a particular criteria that had to be set, which for a project like this, where you have time constraints, you know, and you're probably, and luckily you guys are able to stagger the intervention across, so you're able to assess for experimental control with the multiple baseline design. But I think all except for maybe one of you, right, weren't able to end up doing the embedded reversal, right? Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So that is something for this particular study, especially with having a criteria for that reversal and having a 6-hour window as adults makes this a lot harder when you guys have jobs and you have other responsibilities. And with most of these exercise interventions, this is something that, you know, if you did it again, sometimes we make a tweak of giving just a 24-hour window because a lot of the students and a lot of the groups struggle to meet the goals when it's within their working hours. So sometimes they have like an 8-hour period, and depending on what their job is, you know, they can't then, they've run out of time to be able to go and exercise after work or something like that. So so that might be something you want to write like as a limitation, and you might have also included that for the write-up, is that just having a longer window may have made it easier to hit those 10,000 steps. Okay, I had a couple specific questions about, one, the treatment fidelity. I really loved how you guys broke that down for baseline and intervention and the very specific steps. Typically, when you are writing the results of treatment fidelity, if you are actually collecting for baseline too, you want to provide percentages for baseline and you want to provide percentages for the intervention phase. You don't want to lump those together because you want to compare that. And you also want to present that data for each particular participant. So don't, like I think there were a couple spots, even for the IOA too, you guys provided like group mean data. But you don't really need to do that, because that's going to mask probably some of the differences that you may have had across participants. And so, and the same thing goes for like averaging treatment integrity for baseline and intervention phases. Often it's a lot easier to have correct fidelity for a baseline phase because you don't have your intervention in place. And so it can inflate your overall treatment fidelity if you put them together. So that being said, for the treatment fidelity slide that you guys showed, I don't know if I wasn't following it exactly, but for Erica's data, there was a certain number of steps out of total steps. And it looked like, did you guys, yeah, put that, if you can put up that slide, the next one. Is that how you guys calculated it? Was it the steps completed divided by the total steps?
Correct.
Oh,
Okay.
and I see there's an error there now.
Yeah, just for Erica, I think her fidelity was about 55%, not 81, which is fine. I mean, I think Erica also, I was just curious about what were the challenges that you might have had with treatment fidelity?
So yeah, the biggest challenge was I thought like if I didn't remove my, like put the sticker on at 12 p.m. or 6 p.m. that I didn't receive a check mark for that. So that was my misinterpretation. And I work in a public school, so that was hard at times to put the sticker on right at 12 p.m. or 6 p.m. So that's where I misunderstood.
Oh, I see. Okay, so and so there were differences in I think I have a little bit of trouble following. So at 12 p.m. you were supposed to put a sticker on to indicate that you put the pedometer on.
Yes.
So you may have started your pedometer, but you didn't put the sticker on the treatment fidelity list.
That was part of our treatment integrity steps. Yes.
Yeah, I would have probably given you some wiggle room on that too. The most important thing is that you actually implemented the procedure correctly. It's not as important for the checklist to check off a step on the checklist.
Exactly. I did it every day. So I did put the pedometer on every day and did it. Yeah. Just not
so that's interesting. And a lot of times, so just so you know too, in research, treatment integrity is usually scored for about 30% of sessions, and it's not something that you're doing live. It's usually something like, if there's intervention or something like that, you would go back and you would score the steps, because it is hard to do everything all at once. Sometimes you can, but other times, so probably a lot of you guys ended up at the end of the day just checking off your treatment integrity checklist or something, and that's probably fine as long as you're honestly filling it out. You don't have to necessarily do it in the moment. Another thing for you, Erica, for your graph, and I don't know if any of you guys else did this, if you did not collect for a particular day, try not to just connect to sessions that are across days that you don't have data. Just delete those dates, and then just under them, just write either days and write them out consecutively, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or sessions or something like that. Because when you have data that is kind of stretched like that, it can make it a little bit harder to interpret. Okay. And so you can just do consecutive sessions. And then one thing you guys mentioned was there were some differences, I guess, in how often you guys were collecting step counts. Is that correct? Like, what was your goal? Was it to try to collect 5 days a week, or what was
5 days a week?
And you could pick any 5 days, or did it have to be Monday through Friday?
Yeah, Monday through Friday.
Okay. And then another question I had were, what were your specific reinforcers?
I'll take this one. Yeah. So we tried to replicate it very similar to the original study. And in the original study, they took the kids to like the Dollar Tree and said, go ahead and pick out things that are reinforcing to you. So we all went to the dollar store and picked out things at the dollar store that would be reinforcing. And so we were very limited in that, like, there's only so much at the dollar store that's like reinforcing for adults that you can buy for $1. So, for example, for myself, I was able to buy like some really fuzzy socks and some decorative things to place around my house. And so like those were the things that I sort of earned first when I met my goals. And then towards the end of the pile, there was like pencils, erasers, things that weren't quite as reinforcing. And so then at the end I was like, it's not reinforcing, so I'm not as motivated to get my steps in today. So we were limited to the dollar store for reinforcers.
Yeah. Another challenge for these replication studies sometimes. One is that just when you have to administer your own reinforcers, it can be hard, especially if you're purchasing your own reinforcers. It doesn't tend to hold the same value. So what would you guys say would have perhaps made it a little bit more effective, the reinforcement piece?
I think if we were able to go to Target or sort of increase the monetary value of what the reinforcers were, like if it cost more money, then they would have been more interesting to me. But that's also like not necessarily realistic in everyone's budget to go to Target and spend however much money. So if we could have increased the price value of some of them, then, because I think the things that would have been reinforcing for me would have cost more than $1.
I'd like to answer that too, if that's okay. I think if we were able to set up some sort of system where we got points based on our steps, and then our grade would be reflected by that.
Of course.
Not from you, but if we like created a point system amongst ourselves, and then whoever had the highest, you know, they're going to do the best, I would have been a lot more motivated to get out there walking. Literally, one of my prizes was toothpaste. And by also knowing, since we purchased it, knowing by the end of it, okay, well, I just have to wait a couple weeks and I'll get it all anyway. Like, it wasn't very effective.
Yeah, no, and you know, even when there are effective interventions for these, sometimes the students will say it wasn't the reinforcement that was sort of part of the intervention. It was that I wanted to beat all of my classmates. I wanted to get a good grade on the project. And so there are always also other reinforcers that may be at play, but you make a great point that it's not really contingent anymore, you know, when you have access to them all anyway. So, I mean, you know, if you, and you guys know, you know, if you just wait longer, you're going to get it regardless. And that just shows you too how important it is to have reinforcers that are contingent upon behavior for our clients, because kids are smart too. And they know if you're going to walk out the door and their parents are going to hand it to them, they can wait. They can wait a long time. So, you know, so that's it. You guys have experienced that, you know, in a research study, and it happens, and it's you know, it's a real issue with any behavioral intervention too when we're trying to use reinforcement-based procedures. So, let me see. One other thing. Let's put up the IOA graph, or the table that you guys have. I think for simplicity's sake, you guys can just describe it in terms of total count IOA, because that's really what you guys did. You're doing the smaller number over the larger number. You don't have to worry about a group mean IOA, but what I'd like for you guys to do is just to present an IOA. I mean, now it doesn't matter that much because it's 100% for everybody, but still, just in terms of how you're describing it, I would just say that you took a total count IOA for each participant and provide the formula, which would have been the smaller number over the larger number times 100, and then just provide, you guys can do one sentence and say for all participants, the IOA percentage was 100%. But you typically would then write it for each participant as well. You wouldn't want to just merge it all together, because then the people with lower IOA, it will be inflated. And so it's similar to why we do single subject design, is we always want to see it for each individual. So the mean count IOA and the exact count IOA, I think in the Cooper book, is really referring to interval data. And so it would be looking at, or trial by trial data. So if you had agreement for 9 out of 10 trials, for two observers, are they the same exact 9 trials? You have agreement. So the way in which you guys describe your IOA sounds more in line with total count, because you would have just divided the smaller number by the larger number. So you guys can take out those 2 percentages and just stick to total count. And then I had a question about IOA did you guys collect IOA on every single day?
Every third day.
Every third day. Okay, so So approximately 30% of sessions were scored for IOA. Okay, so just make sure that you guys include that in the write-up as well, what percentage of sessions were scored for IOA purposes. And I think that that's about it. You guys did a very nice job on the presentation. And I really liked your thorough literature review. That was great. And I like how you guys pointed out the differences between what's been done in previous studies compared to the current study, and how you did it in the intro. Usually this is done in like the discussion sections of the manuscript, but how maybe some of the elements of some of the previous studies may have improved the outcomes of your study. And so that's something you may also want to include in the write-up, in that, you know, with the mentoring or whatever the, you know, the other pieces to some of the previous successful interventions have been, how it may have benefited participants in your study. But overall, you guys did a very nice job, and thank you so much for having me be a part of it. I will, I'll email you guys some feedback just in a little bit.